Can you hear that noise? That is the construction outside my house. It's been going on for about 3 weeks. But given all of what's going on in the world today, it's just par for the course, as they might say out in Palm Springs. Recording a podcast in the midst of a construction zone feels like a metaphor for living today. It might seem futile, but it's the best we've got. When everything you thought you knew turns out to be mistaken, when your compatriots let you down, when your neighborhood is on fire and your friends are drowning, when even Quincy Jones decides he's checking out, it helps to have someone to talk to help make sense of it all. Welcome to The Third Story. I'm Leo Sidran. For me, it's my dad who I talk to. Our conversations don't really begin or end, they simply continue. The Third Story has given me the chance to document some of those conversations, often around his birthday or a major project, but also sometimes when a significant event takes place, like the loss of a beloved friend or when we bear witness to something significant together. Today is one of those. Just like we talked after the 2016 and 2020 elections, we spoke this week about the latest presidential election. And true to form, it's a conversation that appears to be about one thing, but is in fact about many things. What begins as a somber acknowledgement of the election results turns quickly to a sprawling discussion of everything from Will Durant's massive 11-volume work, The Story of Civilization, to Seinfeld, to the First Council of Nicaea, Irving Berlin, Jack Kerouac, what separates humankind from the rest of the animal kingdom, bottle service at what he calls the party club, the importance of beauty in the world, and what it means to chop your wood and carry water. Eventually, as it does, the conversation turns to the jazz experience, and we revisit Ben's classic bebop treatise, A Good Travel Agent, which outlines the 3 most important constituent parts about jazz in America. It's another in a long line of great talks between me and Ben. Remember to visit third-story.com for the full archive and all your Third Story podcast needs. There you'll find all of the past conversations with Ben, as well as hundreds of deep-diving conversations with brilliant, creative minds of many types. Please also consider checking out the Substack. It's leosidran.substack.com, where I'm publishing all the podcasts as well as writings and news. Here's me and Ben talking it down the other day, me from Brooklyn and he from Palm Springs, California. Okay, so here's the thing.
Yeah.
You and I, on the whole, I would say, have some communication with one another on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
We have not talked, really, since the election.
Right. Right. And I was very aware of that the day after the election. I was very aware of it on Wednesday. I knew where you were. You knew where I was. There were no words. There was nothing to say. We were both in that bright white space of shock. And there was no reaction to emptiness, man. It was just empty. That's how I felt anyway. I didn't have any words.
It seemed like the last thing to do in that moment was say anything at all.
Yeah.
I have not experienced real loss of any kind. I never lost somebody that I was really close to. I imagine that might be what it's like to mourn. This is mourning. This is a kind of mourning.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Something very apparently real is no longer real. Going in and tweaking the reasons why it's no longer real won't bring it back to life. And by bringing it back to life, I mean having it where it impacts our daily feelings and decisions. This whole thing has been what some would call a teaching moment.
Mm-hmm.
It shows us just how little we know. I mean, of course, you're talking to a guy who for 3 years has been reading Will Durant on the history of civilization and binge watching Seinfeld. So that's been my worldview.
Well, but right there, you kind of have it. You have the history of civilization, which should tell us that these are cycles that will ultimately repeat themselves again and again, because at the core of the human experience are human beings who, no matter how much we evolve, no matter how much philosophy we read, no matter how much technology we have access to, no matter how much artificial intelligence we have access to, at the core of the experience is human beings, and so we are bound to repeat our mistakes again and again. That's the human experience. On the other hand, you have Seinfeld, which is one of the great expressions of 20th century American culture, and so there it is.
There is the situation being what Will Durant tells us, is that the periods of enlightenment are infinitesimal compared to the periods of barbarism. And he actually has a saying, something to the effect that it takes a century to go from barbarism to civilization, but it takes one night for it to go from civilization to barbarism. I mean, he actually has that sentence.
Okay, so you've been reading Will Durant for 3 years. Will Durant was a historian who wrote a history of civilization in the early 20th century?
He started in the 30s and he finished in the late 50s. And it's 11 volumes, each volume about 900 pages. And it's historically detailed, beautifully written. It starts, in the Paleolithic times and goes up through Iron Age, Bronze Age. And as you go forward, the litany of man's inhumanity to man, of barbarism, of slaughter, of greed is endless. And here it is, just this idea of a strong man is who humans are. And of course, keep in mind that when you read Durant, you also understand why democracy never did work. The only democracy that he would call a democracy was Greece, a couple thousand years ago. And it didn't work. And it didn't work because people couldn't be trusted. And so the kind of, quote, democracy that was recommended back then was a kind of monarchist democracy where you have an emperor, a king, or whatever. And the king tells everybody, well, I'm in touch with God. God gave me this gig. And everybody goes, yeah, right. And then we'll have a Senate and we'll talk about stuff. But the king, it's this interplay because it turns out you can't trust the mob. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because in America, on the one hand, Irving Berlin said the mob is never wrong. That was his idea of popular culture.
Right. If it's successful and popular, then it's good.
Then it's good. And on the other hand, H.L. Mencken said you'll never go broke underestimating the intelligence of the American people. So what we have is something that's just been cooking up for centuries and centuries. And not that it does any good to know what happened in Somalia when you're facing, these smug billionaires and these crooked public figures.
On the other hand, we have to confront the idea that a lot of people chose this. There's no mistake about this. I mean, this is definitive. Now, we could argue, well, they were lied to, they were manipulated, the truth was misrepresented to them. But, I thought you were going to say it doesn't really help you to know about Samaria when you can't pay your bills, when you don't know where you fit in society anymore, when you feel isolated and alienated and disenfranchised, that you might be inclined to vote for the strong man.
Yeah, I think that's exactly when you do need to know about Samaria. And I think that part of the problem is exactly that. There's no inflection point for education to enter our lives these days. If you just step back a little bit, the situation we're in clearly is brought on by, number one, the consumer culture that we live in, more. It's not about, yes, people can't pay their bills, but everybody's got a cell phone and driving a car. And it's not like we're all focused on what are the simple roots of peace and happiness and resilience. We're out here scrambling. Everybody's out here scrambling. And there's a panic in the air in the United States. And it's been here in the air. And it's been here before Donald Trump arrived. And the panic has something to do with how greed hollows out any, let's call it, spiritual movement. My feeling about religion, about how in the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine called a meeting of all the holy guys from the church and said, okay, we're going to come together on this. We're going to decide who did what. And frankly, his position was, I don't care what you decide, but we need a decision here. Mm-hmm. We need a decision so I can go back to Rome and kick some serious ass. And so it was political. And they decided, there were conservatives, there were reformers. It was just like today. And the conservatives won. And the conservatives decided on the Trinity. Christ was the Son of God, that the Jews killed Christ. All the canards that we've been dealing with, all this made-up Bronze Age shit was decided as a political expedient. Yeah. Constantine couldn't care one way or the other. It was political. And I find it ironic because, the church has always said, well, the church is important because without the church, men would be no better than the beasts. But if you look at it, the beasts are much better than men. The beasts don't kill each other unless they're hungry. The beasts are more moral than men. And they've got this whole mythology about the church being what stands between barbarism and civilization. Well, there's a lot of what went on back in the day where what passed as civilization was just the old game that people are playing today.
But couldn't we also say, though, that, I mean, everything from marriage to money, any kind of political organization, all of the structures that we create are designed to separate us from barbarism, right? That's the idea. Not just the church, but everything that we've created is designed to civilize us, to keep us from our animal instincts.
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting that the animal instincts won out in the end? Because that's what this guy was serving up. Pure animal instincts. There wasn't an ounce of reason or logic between him and his followers, really. And as a matter of fact, he stayed as far away as he could from it. And he wasn't wrong because his followers are pissed off at the elites. And you know, half a century ago, the elites were the rich people. But now rich people are cool. Everybody wants to be a rich person. Now the elites are educated people. So he fanned that flame, raked those coals, sifted those ashes.
Yes, and I think that there are a lot of fingers that can be pointed in a lot of different directions, but we have to look at the larger story, which includes consumerism and greed, and even larger, which is to say this is part of an ongoing cycle. We thought we were beyond it.
Right, because just like science, it makes sense. It was tested. It was doubted and yet proven correct. And that's why we move forward with the idea of social justice, just like we move forward with the idea of irrigation or anything.
Sure. Any technology, there's a sense of progress and forward motion. So why isn't it true in civilization? I asked you this question last month when we were walking around Montreal. If democracy and capitalism are necessarily linked, I mean, certainly in the United States, we have either conflated them or decided that they are the same. So if we are to look at greed and consumerism as the root problem, but we've also defined ourselves as being tied to being a capitalist economy and a capitalist country, was this inevitable?
Well, I don't think it was inevitable. I mean, let's talk the difference between a nice glass of red wine and bottle service in a party club. In both cases, you're talking about a drink, but you're not really. In the second example, you're talking about everything else other than what you're drinking. Look, there's no win or lose here in the situation we're in. I mean, the only question is, how do we go forward from this?
Yes.
The rest has been decided. And I think it's pretty obvious that the only way forward is in trying to find the human scale, life-size pleasures, things that you can control. Small is beautiful. The truisms are true, and they're true because they're truisms. We are chasing and have been chasing something that really is not healthy. And we continue to do that. And if you want to change your life, first of all, obviously, you have to turn the television off. That has nothing to do with you.
But the television is a 20th century technology. It's not the television anymore. I mean, maybe the television is a stand-in for social media, for Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. But social media is a big part of what's happening here.
I stand corrected. You're absolutely right. Television would have worked better than this.
But small is beautiful.
When I say small is beautiful, you know, this whole thing kind of reminds me, in a way, of the 50s. In the 50s, the myth is that it was all Ozzie and Harriet, and America was now equal, and the opportunity was everywhere, and it wasn't that. It's totally the opposite. And it was the 50s in America were brutal, not just like the McCarthy hearings, but the repression, prejudices, the sexual repression.
And the segregation.
The whole thing. The 50s were horrible. And the 50s spawned this beat movement. It wasn't very big. It was small. There were a few guys. In fact, although there were pockets, I'm sure, scattered everywhere, as far as the origin story is concerned, there were 4 or 5 guys up at Columbia named Ginsberg and Kerouac and whatever. But this whole concept of subterranean culture, going underground, being other, finding an alternative, finding your place, liberating yourself. This whole thing became monetized very easily in the 60s and 70s. I mean, that was one of the real trade-offs of the love and peace culture, was we were able to sell Levi's to teenagers and make them feel there was freedom attached to it. We didn't do very well on the lessons of, to the other guy, you're the other guy. I think that we have an opportunity here. It's really perverse, and I'm still in shock. But I think we have an opportunity here to change ourselves and to change things and to change what's important to us and to be resilient and to stay on task. Mm-hmm. I think we do have an internal sense of what the task is. And it has to do with being a decent person. Mm-hmm. You know, we used to say a couple of years ago, remember, it's revolutionary just to be happy.
Radical positivity.
Radical positivity. Well, guess what? It's radical decency now. This goes all the way back to the mother root of an eye for an eye, do unto others. The anger that has driven this whole thing. And that's really what it is, you know. We all know that anger comes from fear. It's a cliche. But the thing about anger, obviously, is that it destroys the vessel it's in. It does. It eats it from the inside. And anger often comes from policy, in a way. If this, then that, and if only this, then that, and that leads to polling, and that leads to strategies, and the next thing you know, you're a million miles away from resolving the anger. I think radical positivity, it's not radical at all. I think that's how we literally start to save our lives at this time.
Yes, it may seem like a melodramatic or extreme thing to say, but one wonders, what did it feel like to see the sunrise from within the concentration camps? What did it feel like to be inside a human body during any number of the horrors through human civilization, the history of human civilization? It felt like it feels right now.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunately always been the case, and that we're blind to it. This is what history feels like. Never feels any different. It felt like this in the Holocaust. It felt like this on the barricades in Paris. It felt like this when the wall came down in Berlin.
It must have felt like this when the Titanic was sinking, too.
So what I started when we started talking was the white sheet of consciousness the day after. Mm-hmm. The moment when you realize that whole construct of hope and despair and if, that, then just disappeared. And there was just this realization. And connected to that realization is, as you say, beauty. Beauty is really something that we take with us. The last moment of our lives, we're going to be more concerned with beauty than we are with statistics. Similarly, we have an opportunity. I mean, it's like getting hit in the head with a 2x4, but we have the opportunity to wake up to the fact that the answers are not all out there and we're searching for them. The answers are in here. And to some extent, you don't have to search for them. You just have to, and this is a very Zen thing to say, and I can't say that I can achieve it, but you have to discover it. You have to discover it. And the main thing that the authoritarians and oligarchs do is they promise you that they're going to deliver an answer.
That there is an answer to be delivered.
That there is an answer to be delivered, which takes the whole problem out of the realm of reality into the abstract realm of power. Right? If there's an answer, somebody's going to give it to you.
I spoke to your sister, to my aunt, Maxine. She was actually the only person that I had a long conversation with on Wednesday after the election. One thing that she said to me was, what the Buddhists will tell you is, you do the thing that you can do. Just do what you can do. Prepare your tea and wash your bowl. I love that image because it's not look out for you only. It's do what you can do as beautifully and with as much intention as you can do.
How about chop your wood and carry water?
Yeah.
If all we get from this moment is a way out of the anger trap, it'll be huge. If all we get out of this moment is a sense that we too are part of the problem when we're panicked, when we allow ourselves to be panicked, that stability, decency exists in the glass of wine, not the bottle service.
What, however, given the nature of the conversation that we have been having for 40 some years and that you've devoted your life to, that you've written books about, that you've thought about, probably more than anything else in your life, the American experience, what it produced, the importance of jazz, the relationship of Jews and blacks in America, the contribution of popular culture to the planet from the United States, the 20th century, the American century. I mean, these are things that have been just at the core of your thinking, of your life. It's such an indignity to be here at this ripe old age of 81, and not only you, but your entire generation, to be served this absolute rebuke.
Yeah, one of the hardest parts of this is I don't know if I'm going to live long enough to see the other side. I mean, I'm that age where 4 years, maybe I'm here, maybe I'm not. And there are a lot of people around me, same situation. Is this how it fucking ends for me? Is this all our best efforts is what got us here? Is this it? Did I move the dial at all through my concerns?
Well, and particularly for you, I imagine we've talked about this before on the record, but I mean, for you, your catchphrase, mantra, motto has been, we will let history decide what was important and what wasn't.
Yes, that is my mantra.
I believe that also, but I also believe that at this particular inflection point in history, so much of what you think is important is being repudiated.
That's right. That's really true. That simply tells me I'm right.
We move the dial in ways that we don't expect or think.
Well, that's true.
We set out to move it in the ways that we decide we want it to be moved. And along the way, somebody hears something that you did, you have a conversation with somebody, some event that you could have never predicted sets something in motion that is out of your hands but is the result of something that you did. I mean, that's where it happens. It doesn't happen in the ways we think it happens.
It's the butterfly in China, flaps its wings and there's a windstorm in Arizona. I do think it's kind of a moral, ethical, human compass when these things happen. And you can choose to be repudiated or not. Again and again, anger will only add fuel to the fire of repudiation. And I do think back on those bohemians and those hipsters and those artists who lived this underground way of really searching for beauty in ideas, beauty in form, beauty in speech, beauty in music. Yesterday I was playing piano and I was playing the Bud Powell tune, Time Waits. I was so close to tears halfway through playing it. I mean, I haven't felt that raw and open to that song maybe since I first heard it 50 years ago. It was just so beautiful and so understanding. The song understood me, understood us. The song understood the human condition, the real ultimate tragedy of the human condition. That was really something. It slowed down all the crazy chatter in my head, and it really delivered something to me that I need to consider at the last stages of my participation in this particular game. I'm really grateful for music. I mean, that's the bottom line for me. I don't know what life would be like without being able to hear music and love music and let music lead you on and find those places where people can touch each other. Without that, I mean, I saw a picture of Jeff Bezos after the election. This smug motherfucker with $250 billion. Man, that is one real low form of life.
Well, when you talk about a tech billionaire or, Jeff Bezos, Amazon, or Elon Musk, or any of these people who have built these massive fortunes, it does point to something that I think about, which is what it means to be underground today. I mean, the thing about being underground in the 50s was there was an agreed upon mainstream American culture, and there were a lot of agreed upon taboos. There was such a thing as being taboo and being socially and culturally acceptable. We don't have that anymore.
Right.
So it's hard to be underground, because underground relative to what? I mean, what's happened is it's atomized and it's siloed, and everybody's in their own little bunker.
That's a really good point. That's like we were talking a while back about there's no one song anymore that everybody likes.
Of course, there's no one artist that everybody's listened to, knows all the words, whether they like it or not. They've had to hear it. There's no dominant culture other than technology, other than social media, Amazon and Google and Apple. I mean, that's popular culture. The delivery mechanism is the popular culture.
Well, there it is. That'll serve me good stead to go underground. And when I see it, go the other way.
It's so heartbreaking to me when I hear this, but on the other hand, I understand it. It's inevitable. I talked to somebody I really admire and respect the other day. It's a really smart person who said to me, well, the baby boomers are at fault here. I think every generation is inclined to cast blame at the previous generation or two generations prior to it. And the reason I have a particular issue with that is because for the first half of my life, absolutely believed I belonged to the wrong generation, and I wished I had been a baby boomer.
Yeah.
I made it my job to pass as a baby boomer. I made it my job to act and seem as though I could have lived through the 60s even though I wasn't there. And everything that happened just before I showed up seemed more important to me than anything that ever happened while I was alive. I spent the 90s, my college years, crying that I was living through the wrong moment in history. Why couldn't I have been born 20 years earlier and gotten to see all the good shit and lived in a time when I felt we were really doing something meaningful and that history was happening? And here I was. What did we have? I don't know. Starbucks, the Gap. I'm going to spend the second half of my life, I think, with the understanding that I'm alive maybe in the most important time of human history.
I don't think you're wrong. I think you're absolutely right. It is. There's never been a confluence of internal, external, natural, technical forces, vectors coming together with no way to predict it. I mean, if you're not here to witness it, you will never know what it was.
Right. And it's interesting because I always assumed that everybody who lived through the 60s came out more or less with the same position on it because they had all witnessed it. It's like if we're all staring up at the sky and we see the comet pass in the night, we all saw it. How could we not have the same experience of witnessing that comet pass? But as I'm watching this go down, I realize, now I can't even align with myself on what I saw, much less what other people are seeing. Everybody here is trying to make sense of the chaos.
Yeah.
And we're all witnesses to it, and yet there is no consensus on what we're watching. But I think we do agree that this is some different shit, though.
Yes, and I'm glad you phrased it that way because, as you know, I'm working on a new album, and the title of the album is Witness Protection. And I believe that those of us who have witnessed it need protection and have to find protection and have to find a way to live in this variation on the concept of witness protection. I think that's another way of saying history can make you awful raw sometimes. Yeah. So it's dangerous out here to think that you can understand who, where, what you are completely because it's constantly shifting and moving. And this moment that we have brought that home.
It's constantly shifting and moving, and one of the most reliable antidotes to that uncertainty of knowing where you are is having a good story to remind yourself who you are, where you came from, and where you want to go. I mean, that has been what has kind of saved us and brought us through the human experience so far.
The narrative that we tell ourselves. The story that we tell of ourselves makes us who we are. And that story comes from our hopes and dreams and our histories. And even if we lose our memories, the stories carry the memories on in some form. I mean, as crazy as the stories may be in the Bible, they still contain hard and cold facts. The only thing I would like to add to this conversation is that I hope I can convince you to make this witness protection record with me. I need some help. I need some boundaries on it.
I'm pleased that your response to this is to write some songs, because I could imagine a different person in the face of this saying, that's it, I got nothing left to say here. Mm-hmm. And instead, I see you saying, I have a reason now to write.
This is an opportunity, man, because I think this could be good. I could make some money. I could get some Bitcoin out of this. I'm not over yet. Clearly, that's a joke I put on, but part of me and part of what keeps us going is the game. We're in this game. We're all playing this game. And it's the only game in town. I mean, it has different textures, and it's a wide-ranging game, and you can do it sitting alone with your tea in your teacup, or you can do it on your private jet. But we're all in this game. That's it. Here we are. This is modern life.
I find myself, and I have to catch myself before I fall for it, thinking, well, hopefully my daughter and her generation will come up with something better.
Really?
Don't you always look to the next generation and say, it's on them?
I always looked at you and thought, I hope he has as much fun as I had. I didn't really think that where we are today was possible, so I never factored it in.
But it's always the worst moment. I mean, on the one hand, there is no moment other than the moment that we're in. And on the other hand, it's always the worst moment. This is always the most urgent problem, whatever it is. When I was growing up, the political concerns, the Cold War, I mean, that was very real and very scary. And yet here we are again today saying this is, to be an American, there's nothing that compares to this, and we didn't see it coming. So, I mean, I love that you say, hey, I hope my kid gets to have as much fun as I'm having. But I guess I do have to ask you, you don't necessarily expect to see the other side of this. What do you hope for Soul, for your granddaughter?
Well, I see the world through 20th century eyes. And so my pain and disappointment is in part a carryover from the beliefs I've developed going through that. You don't see it through those eyes. You have a different set of responses. And likewise, she doesn't see it as you see it. So what I hope for Soul is that she has food in her stomach and a roof over her head and friends and family and beauty in her life and some peace, and that it doesn't hurt too much.
It's funny, like when you think about one of your great raps, early raps, when you started kind of doing this jazz rap on stage, you talked about the history of jazz.
Yeah.
You are one of the great practitioners of basically coming up with some shit because it sounded good and make it mean something.
Shake a tail feather.
And then people think, wow. But,
yeah,
you had this thing about how there were three crucial aspects of jazz.
Simple constituent parts, yes.
Some of you know I like to talk about the history of this music. I like to talk about the history of this music so much that I can go on and on and on and on to save you the pain of that experience. I have managed to condense everything I know about jazz in America into three simple constituent parts. And it's my firm belief that after laying these three simple elements upon you, you too will know everything you need to know about jazz music in America. How can he do it, they say? They ask, how can he do it? Can he do it? Yes, indeed, he can.
And the first one was, you got to have a good travel agent.
No. The first one was you had to have a bad romance.
Oh, a bad romance.
You see, I have studied scientifically the way to synthesize this material. And in the cauldron of knowledge known as the road, the bebop road that goes on and on and on, I have boiled the information down. Three little pearls of wisdom. It goes like this. The most important thing about jazz in America. It's been true since the first note turned blue in 1902. Number one, the most important thing, it's a bad romance. You see?
It had to be a really bad romance.
You've got to have a bad romance to play this music. Now, I don't mean a little sad romance.
Not just a sad romance.
Not a little 1 or 2 week affair that suddenly went square.
Not just a 1 or 2 week affair that suddenly went square.
Went square.
Really, really bad hurt. Somebody had to get their just dessert to make this music come out.
Thank you very much. No, you needed a bad romance.
And you know, given all the bad romance in the world today, it's a surprise there aren't more jazz players here with us. But these boys here with me today, they're experts. Some of them are particularly experts in the subject.
And number two, you needed a good travel agent because nothing will get you out of town faster than a bad romance.
Well, number one is a bad romance. Number two, what could it be? I'll tell you what it is. It's a good travel agent. The second most important thing in jazz music, it's a good travel agent.
I mean, brilliant.
Because nothing will get you out of town faster than a bad romance.
Let's call a spade a spade. Your wife, my mother, was a travel agent, so it was a convenient way to flatter and honor her in some way, I would like to think.
Yes.
Oh, it's feeling pretty good now. I think I'm on the road.
So in order to explain why a good travel agent is so important, you tell the story of Buddy Bolden.
But as I say, I've studied scientifically, and I have further proof of whereof I speak. To wit, cast your mind back to that time when that note first turned blue, 1902. The place, Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana. A hot summer night. It's August. The crickets are cricketing, the chirpings are chirping, and out on the edge of a pier, he's got a cornet in one hand, he's got his eyes on the prize way up in the skies. A wonderful, wonderful trumpet player named Buddy Bolden. And let me ask you something. How many people in this room here tonight have heard the music of Buddy Bolden? I'll answer that for you. No, now you're lying, brother. You never heard Buddy Bolden. Buddy Bolden never recorded. He didn't make record one, and the reason? He did not have himself a good travel agent.
Buddy Bolden is a totally 20th century kind of figure, or even 19th century kind of figure,
right,
in that he represented something that you'll never hear. There's no documentation of the guy. There's no recording of him. He was a trumpet player from Louisiana, and people said that he was the proto-jazz trumpeter, right, before Louis Armstrong, but you never got to hear him play. That represents something on a very human scale to us that has been useful because it's based on mythology and the power of story. It doesn't have to have any evidence to support it. It can, but it doesn't have to. The power of it is in the story and not in the document.
Exactly.
So you said, well, Buddy Bolden, the reason he never recorded...
He never got out of town.
Never got out of town, didn't have a good travel agent. It's a conceit that does not belong to us today. It's so far away from today because everything is recorded. There's a record of every text message, of every email that we've sent. This is another thing, man. You're talking about you living a 20th century life. Your correspondence, your papers, your boxes of cassettes and CDs and reel-to-reel tapes, all of your artifacts live in a museum in Wisconsin. They live at the University of Wisconsin. You must be the last generation of people who are going to be able to do that. I mean, what are my artifacts going to be? Emails?
Be a thumb drive.
A thumb drive. Here's a thumb drive of Leo Sidran's life.
Drive.
So, yeah, you're damn right you're coming from a 20th century point of view. I mean, this is a different reality here.
It is a different reality. There's no question about it. And it takes a particular spiritual, ethical, physical, emotional twisting inside oneself to find a comfortable position, a place to sit here.
You've got your shoulder to the plow, but your back's up against the wall.
Yeah, and your nose is to the grindstone.
Yeah, and from that ridiculous position,
that's it.
You're supposed to make something happen.
Now make something happen. Well, clearly, this conversation is a real example of the problem and the solution. The problem is that we want to take stuff apart microscopically, and the solution is that it gives us an excuse to talk to each other.
Would you do me a favor and just play a little bit of Time Waits for me? Thank you, man.
I am so lucky to have you, man. I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't look forward to your next phone call. Honestly,
I love you.
love you.